The cold came down like a verdict, sudden and merciless, sealing the mountain in white silence and snapping the world into stillness. Snow hammered the roof of the old cabin as if the night itself were trying to break in, and the wind screamed through the pines with a fury that felt personal. Inside that frozen box of logs and iron, a single dad named Caleb Morgan stood with numb hands and a heart already bruised by years of quiet endurance, while across the narrow room the CEO he barely knew, Victoria Hale, stared into the storm with the composure of someone who had never been powerless, until now. By morning, the temperature would drop further, the road would vanish, and something unspoken would be pressed into the air between them, something that would change the night and, in time, their lives. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the way one moment can rewrite a future, take a second right now to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this find the hearts they're meant for. Caleb had taken the maintenance job at the winter retreat because it paid steady and let him bring his 8-year-old son on weekends, a compromise that mattered when you were raising a child alone. He was the kind of man who kept his head down and his promises kept, who learned how to stretch groceries and sleep through worry, who carried grief without wearing it on his face. His wife had died 3 winters earlier in a highway accident outside Bozeman, and since then his world had narrowed to school lunches, late-night laundry, and the hope that doing the next right thing would be enough. When the company announced that the new CEO would be visiting the remote cabins for a leadership retreat, Caleb didn't expect to meet her, much less end up stranded with her as the blizzard swallowed the road and the radios crackled into uselessness. Victoria Hale had arrived like a clean line drawn through a messy page, precise and purposeful, a woman used to control. She ran a national logistics firm headquartered in Chicago, a name that moved markets and a mind that never rested. The mountain was meant to be a reset, a branding exercise about humility and teamwork. She wore tailored boots and carried a notebook filled with plans that assumed the world would cooperate. When the storm turned savage, it did not ask permission. The snow fell so fast the plows couldn't keep up, and by dusk the retreat director made the call to shelter in place. Most of the team clustered in the lodge, but a power surge tripped the main line, and the generator sputtered. Caleb had been sent to check the outlying cabins, and Victoria had followed, determined not to be the executive who waited to be rescued. The cabin they reached was old and stubborn, its stove still sound, its walls thick with the smell of pine and iron. The door closed behind them with a finality that felt like a sentence. When the wind rose, the road disappeared in minutes, and the radio died in Caleb's hands with a small, sad click. He stacked wood with the muscle memory of someone who had learned survival early, while Victoria watched, her breath fogging the air, her phone useless, her city certainty stripped away. The cold pressed in from every seam. Outside, the night became a living thing. Hours passed in a rhythm set by necessity. Caleb fed the stove, rationed the blankets, measured the hours by the way the fire hissed and settled. He thought of his son, Noah, asleep in a warm bed at his sister's place in Helena, and the ache of that thought made him careful, steady. Victoria tried to help, her hands awkward at first, then learning. She had grown up in a house where warmth was assumed and help was hired. The storm did not care about resumes. When the lights flickered out completely, the cabin fell into a darkness broken only by flame and snowlight. The night deepened, and with it the weight of unshared things. Caleb felt the old pressure in his chest, the fear that had learned to live there after the accident, the sense that everything good was temporary and fragile. Victoria sat wrapped in a blanket, her posture slowly loosening, the armor of authority giving way to exhaustion. She had come to the mountain to prove a point about resilience, but the truth was, she had been running for years, from a childhood spent in foster homes, from a life built by never needing anyone. The storm peeled her open without asking. It was sometime after midnight when the cold reached a new pitch, a crystalline sharpness that made the fire feel small. Caleb checked the stove and did the math in his head, counting logs, counting hours. He had learned how to do that after the funeral, when counting was easier than feeling. Victoria watched him with a new kind of attention, noticing the gentleness in his movements, the way he saved the best blanket for someone else. She had signed off on budgets that trimmed benefits in closed sites, decisions made in conference rooms far from the faces they affected. Sitting there, she saw the cost written in the lines of a man who had never been on her spreadsheets. The whisper came then, not as a line of dialogue, but as a breath released into the space between them. A confession carried on warmth. Victoria leaned closer to the fire and let the truth escape her in a way she never had before, a soft admission of fear and loneliness that cracked the night open. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. It was the kind of truth that asks nothing except to be heard. Caleb felt it land, felt something shift inside him as he realized that power did not protect anyone from the cold, and that strength could be as quiet as sharing a blanket. From that moment, the cabin changed. The storm was still there, the danger real, but the room warmed in a different way. Caleb spoke of Noah, of the way the boy laughed at bad jokes and believed snowmen were brave. He spoke without drama, the facts laid gently on the table. Victoria listened, really listened, the way she had not in years. She saw the life he was holding together with calloused hands and stubborn hope. In the firelight, her certainty softened into resolve of another kind, the kind that grows roots. They took turns sleeping, backs to the wall, ears tuned to the stove. Caleb dreamed of roads opening and closing, of holding a small hand through a crossing. Victoria dreamed of a house with windows that let light in and stayed. When dawn finally broke, it came pale and quiet, the storm exhausted, the world transformed into a field of white. Rescue would take time, but the worst had passed. When the plow arrived hours later, it brought more than relief. It brought a promise, though neither of them named it then. In the days that followed, Victoria returned to Chicago with the mountains still in her bones. She ordered a review, not the kind that trimmed, but the kind that mended. She changed policies that had been lines on a page and made them lifelines. She remembered a man stacking wood in a storm and made room in the company for people like him. Caleb returned to his routine with Noah, the memory of the night a quiet ember he carried forward. Months passed. A letter arrived at the retreat addressed to Caleb, handwritten, careful. It spoke of gratitude without spectacle, of a job offer that respected his skills and his life, of flexibility that understood school plays and sick days. It spoke of a foundation started quietly, aimed at families navigating loss. It did not mention the whisper, but it honored it in every line. Caleb accepted, not because he needed saving, but because he recognized sincerity when he saw it. Years later, the cabin would stand unchanged, a stubborn witness on the mountain. Caleb would visit with Noah, now taller, his laughter echoing against the logs. Victoria would come sometimes too, not as a CEO, but as a person who had learned what it meant to be present. They would sit by the fire and let the silence do its work. The night that had once threatened to end them had instead begun something truer, a reminder that the smallest truths, spoken softly, can carry more heat than any storm. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness can show up in the coldest places, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. Before the ending, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what moment stayed with you the most. Because in the end, it wasn't the storm that defined them, or the cabin, or the titles they carried into the night. It was the courage to whisper the truth and the grace to listen, and the way that choice warmed a frozen world back into motion.